Celtic in Person, Volume 2, Willie Orr, Part 1, 1897 to 1900. A quick correction from the last episode before we start. I carelessly said Celtic finished 5 points behind Rangers in season 1894-95, but of course it was Hearts who won the league, 5 points ahead of second place Celtic in 1894-95, Rangers finishing in third place, 4 points behind Celtic. I did describe Hearts as the champions during the section dealing with season 1895-96, so hopefully no one was under the impression that Rangers won the league in 1894-95. After sharing the very first title with Dumbarton in 1891, Rangers did not win the league outright for the first time until 1899. Season 1897-98 represented a new beginning for Celtic. The club was incorporated as a limited liability company in April 1897, and the Celtic Football and Athletic Company was ready to put the divisions of the past few years behind them, although unfortunately it was now no longer a charitable concern. In fact, it had been some years since any significant donations had been made from operating profits, and many fans were still unhappy about this departure from the club's roots. Discontent over the direction the club was taking would rumble on for a few seasons yet. The Celtic Break clubs, which were constitutionally members of the League of the Cross, a temperance group, were especially uncomfortable with the idea of supporting a club run by a board of directors known as 6 Publicans and 1 Glass, John Glass being the only non-publican on the board. The league title had been lost in disastrous fashion after the players' strike of November 1896, and a humiliating exit from the Scottish Cup followed in January 1897, when a makeshift side, decimated by injuries and club suspensions, had been beaten 4-2 by Atherley in Barrhead. Celtic had finished the season in 4th place, their lowest ever league position to that point. With money to spend from incorporation, they were determined to regain their position at the top of the Scottish game and went on something of a spending spree that summer, importing a number of players from English clubs, including George Allen from Liverpool and Jim Welford and John Reynolds from Aston Villa. Reynolds had previously played for both Ireland and England, scoring against Scotland at Celtic Park for England in 1894. But while he claimed to have been born in Blackburn, his nationality was said to be doubtful. Not counting own goals, he is the only player ever to score for and against England. Also signed in the summer of 1897 were Scotsmen Willie Orr and Adam Henderson from Preston North End, Hugh Goldie from Everton, and, to great acclaim, Johnny Campbell, brought back home from Aston Villa along with Welford and Reynolds. The Dundee Telegraph wrote on the 8th of May 1897, "The Celtic seem to have got the pick of the basket, and once their new men get trained to each other's way, I shall be surprised if a more invincible 11 can be sent on to a Scottish football field." After the legalisation of professionalism in England in 1885, a succession of Scottish players moved south, where they were known as the Scotch Professors, for their part in spreading what was a more sophisticated passing style of football to the English game, which had been long based on dribbling and rushing. The Sunderland team that played Scottish champions Hearts in 1896 for the unofficial World Championship was made up of 11 Scots. In an academic nod to the Scotch Professors, these English imports were referred to as the Dons. There's no doubt that at the time, the most exciting signing of the lot was the return of Johnny Campbell, and it was rumoured that a huge sum of money had been spent to secure his signature. Tom Maley had been sent to Birmingham to persuade him to come home, and while he was there, took the opportunity to sign his Villa teammates Welford and Reynolds as well. The Sporting Life of the 12th of May 1897 wrote, "Reynolds did not seem comfortable in Birmingham, and although he had been promised a benefit match in 1898, the idea had long ago been formed that as soon as he got the chance, he would seek fresh pastures. Blackburn Rovers sought his signature, but the Glasgow Celtic officials sprung the mouse brass, and Reynolds will cross the border to perform at Parkhead. When in the mood, he is a fine player, and Birmingham people will miss him without a doubt. Reynolds has been capped by the English and Irish associations, and he now stands a chance of being duly recognised by a Scottish ruling body. His nationality, like his age, has always been doubtful, although Reynolds swears he was born in Blackburn exactly 27 years ago. The Celtic club will have a fair sprinkling of Birmingham players next season, Campbell and Wilford also appearing in their midst. Campbell is a vastly superior player to what he was 2 years ago when he left Scotland, and it is to be hoped the Celtic will fully appreciate his qualities this time. The outside left wing was his position in Scotland, but while in English service, he was always seen to greater advantage when in the centre. Campbell was very popular in Birmingham, his quiet and unassuming manner making him a warm favourite everywhere. He has left the Villa on the best of terms, his chief reason for returning to Scotland being a family one. The English League champions will not readily fill his position to advantage. Wilford has been on the shelf for some time, but when in form he is a reliable and dashing back. In a line with Dan Doyle, the Celtic rear division will strike terror into the heart of many ambitious Scotch forwards. Wilford is very little short of 14 stone and tall with it. When on the run, he will face and break up almost anything. According to the rules of the Scottish Association, when signing on a player, the limit amount paid to the new man should be £10. Rumour has it in Birmingham that the Celtic paid Campbell £70 and Wilford £30 before they made certain of booking them. With all their other English importations, the Glasgow club mean to carry everything before them, if possible, in the coming season. Some of the new signings would only have short Celtic careers. Reynolds was released in January 1898, having failed to live up to his reputation, and Allen returned to Liverpool at the end of the season. But the most significant signing by far was that of Willie Orr. Willie Orr was born in Shotts on the 20th of June 1873 and began his career at Airdrieonians before joining Preston North End in 1894. Preston were one of the leading clubs in England and twice finished fourth in the Football League in Orr's time there. He was just short of his 24th birthday when he signed for Celtic on the 1st of May 1897. A skillful and quick player, Orr was equally at home in the half-back line or at full-back, but left-back was the position into which he would eventually settle for Celtic, and he was regarded as one of the best in Britain. Orr's leadership qualities would see him become captain of Celtic, and over the next 10 years he would cement a reputation as one of the finest players to play for the club. His spell at the club saw plenty of initial success, then a sticky period in the middle, before he led Celtic through the beginnings of the greatest era in their history before the Steen years. After the new season opened with a 4-1 league win over Hibernian at Celtic Park on the 4th of September 1897, the club bid farewell to Johnny Madden with a benefit match against Rangers. With James Kelly, Willie Maley and Madden now retired, all of the original Celtic team from 1888 was gone. The 32-year-old Madden played in the club's first ever match against Rangers in 1888, but then returned to Dumbarton for a season before signing for Celtic permanently in 1889. He had been a mainstay of the side ever since and was nicknamed the Rooter for his powerful shot, which it was said threatened to uproot the goalposts if they hit the woodwork. The benefit match generated £200 for the player, with the Scottish referee writing on the 10th of September 1897, "Player John Madden may have experienced, like most people, some bad luck in his varied and versatile career, but he is in luck now and recompensed for all his penalty kicks. Thanks to the combined efforts of the Celtic and Rangers, aided of course by Madden's many friends, no less a sum than £200 has been raised for his benefit. The son of the Rock has now the basis of a small fortune laid, and we trust he will go on adding to it. Money easily earned is oftener than otherwise easily parted with. Madden should bear in mind, however, that he is a young man, and that he ought to make provision for the proverbial rainy day that cometh to all. Madden's reward should encourage all our players to good behaviour, so that when retiring they may do so with the approval of the public and secure, like Madden, some tangible token." Madden would soon come out of retirement for a spell with Dundee before finishing his career with Tottenham Hotspur in 1898. He later went on a continental adventure, becoming manager of Slavia Prague in 1905, and he remained there for the rest of his life. Bringing the Scottish style of football to Bohemia, in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the innovative Madden also introduced dietary and fitness regimes and banned his players from smoking, while smoking on the sidelines himself, and from drinking before matches. His reign as Slavia manager was a long and hugely successful one. He would meet again with old Celtic friends in 1922 when the club toured the newly formed Czechoslovakia, including a friendly against Slavia, and he remained there until his retiral at the age of 66 in 1930. The Czechoslovakian side that finished runners-up to host Italy in the 1934 World Cup contained 8 players with connections to Madden through Slavia Prague. He is regarded as the father of Czech football, and having lived through the German occupation during World War II and the beginnings of the Soviet occupation, he died in April 1948. Every year on the anniversary of his death, the Friends of Slavia still lay flowers on his grave on behalf of the club. Madden's benefit match was lost 3-1, and the Scottish referee had some advice for Celtic moving forward. In common with many people, we are not exactly pleased with the Celtic's present centre, nor with the team as constructed. Of course, the committee have been experimenting, and it is to be hoped that now their minds are made up as to the ability and proper place for the men to be in. If the committee have not yet completed their team building, we beg to suggest that Campbell be played as centre forward. We saw how capable he was in this position for Aston Villa, and he is as able to serve the Celts there as he was the Villains. Campbell is, without doubt, Celtic's best forward, and not only in playing ability, but in knowledge of balancing a team he is far ahead of his partners. He is a crack shot also, and this completes his rig-out in our judgment as a centre, in which position we not only hope to see Celtic place him, but the international selectors as well. Old habits die hard. Since incorporation in April that year, there was no committee anymore. Celtic was now run by a board of directors, 2 of whom, James Kelly and Michael Dunbar, were former players. Those 2, along with newly appointed secretary-manager Willie Orr, were now in charge of team affairs. Their task, in this first season as an incorporated club, would be to restore Celtic's lost prestige from the previous campaign. Hearts were once again league winners and second only to Celtic in outright championships. But the team that was receiving all the plaudits was Rangers, who had emulated Celtic's feat of 1892 in winning a treble of Scottish Cup, Glasgow Cup and Glasgow Charity Cup. The Scottish referee that close season referred to Rangers as the Scottish champions. The paper was ever keen to praise Rangers, but this shows the continuing prestige of the Scottish Cup over the league, and it was now 6 seasons since Celtic's only triumph in the competition. The newly and expensively assembled Celtic team needed to justify the expenditure by winning the Scottish Cup sooner rather than later. They got off to a decent start in the league, with some of the new signings making immediate impacts. The return of Johnny Campbell saw Sandy McMahon approaching his best form again, while Willie Orr formed a strong half-back partnership with David Russell. A 0-0 draw at Tynecastle was followed up with a 2-1 Glasgow Cup win over Clyde and a 2-0 win away to St Bernard's in the league, before the team ignited in a 6-1 league win over Clyde on the 25th of September, setting up an early season showdown with Rangers. Both teams were on 7 points from 4 matches, and even at this early stage, it was being spoken of as one of the decisive clashes of the campaign. The Dundee Courier of the 28th of September 1897 reported, "An immense crowd assembled at Ibrox yesterday to witness this league match. The teams were the same as played on Saturday. Play was very fast and exciting. When the Celts' turn came, Drummond, miskicking, gave a corner, which Gilhooly placed so well that McMahon headed through amidst uproarious cheers. The Rangers were playing the more exact game, but the Celtic were the more dangerous in rushes, rousing the crowd to frenzy. McMahon surprised everybody, playing in his old form, while behind him Russell was doing wonders. The Celtic forwards showed splendid tactics, and King, after missing an easy chance, scored a magnificent goal. Towards half-time the Rangers improved, but met a grand defence. Half-time, Celtic 2 goals, Rangers 0. On resuming, the Rangers led off an attack, but the Celtic replied in more likely fashion, and Campbell scored. Play as they liked in the open, the Rangers were doomed to failure near goal. 10 minutes from time, Russell sent in a long shot, Allen heading through. A great game resulted, Celtic 4 goals, Rangers 0. The match was watched by a new Scottish League record crowd of 30,000, an attendance all the more remarkable for the match having been played on a Monday. The win set down a marker for the season, and the Edinburgh Evening News of the 1st of October was already predicting a Celtic victory in the league race. Only at Tynecastle do they regard the championship of 1896-97 as the reward of merit. But we will not pursue the subject further, save by expressing gratification with the fact that the present season suggests that if the Celtic have the staying powers, they will have the way open to them to win the highest honours of the year. The famous revolt ruined last season. There were times when the Celtic management must have been tempted to let bygones be bygones because of the straits they were in, and it was immensely to their credit that they stood to their resolution and did not again allow the offenders to wear their colours. Were football decently regulated, men guilty of such an offence as the revolters were would have been ostracised for all time coming. As it was, we saw clubs falling over each other in their eagerness to secure the signature of the precious trio. But that by the way. What we have to do with at present is the promise shown by the Celtic of repeating their success of 1895-96. Right away, we may confess to having underrated their resources before and at the beginning of the season. Against the Hibernians, in a match which they won easily enough on paper, they played a moderate game. At Tynecastle, they only suggested themselves as championship aspirants because of the ineptitude of most of their rivals. At Logie Green, they played in a greatly improved manner, but even there they gave no hint of the brilliance which has since played havoc with the Clyde and Rangers. The Celtic unquestionably are the team of the hour, and they may easily be the team of the season. Leaving out of sight such players as Reynolds and Blessington, reserves of one class, J. Orr and Henderson, reserves of another, the Celtic have on Monday's showing the half-back line which promises best of any in Scotland. Russell has no equal in a time of good centre-halves. The men alongside of him, Hugh Goldie and Willie Orr, are of the effective class, and both are capable of taking on more polish than ever Russell will. With such backing as they gave, any forwards might shine, and now that McMahon has recovered, it may be for the time only, but we are glad to see even that, his old form, the Celtic have forwards capable of the best things. Nor need they fear for their defence, especially with MacArthur at his best, and though the Celts cannot be expected to maintain Monday's standard of super excellence, overconfidence is perhaps all they need fear. They have the making of champions. Celtic were imperious in the league, dropping only 3 points as they went the season unbeaten, winning 15 of their 18 matches. But there was bitter disappointment once again in the cup competitions. The Glasgow Cup semi-final turned into a marathon affair, requiring 2 replays and extra time in the second before Rangers ran out 3-1 winners. In the first match at Celtic Park on the 30th of October 1897, Willie Orr was hurt in the first half but struggled on, during which time Rangers went 1 up. After being injured a second time, Orr had to go off, and Rangers scored again to lead 2-0 at half-time. Orr's injury would keep him out of the side until the new year. In the second half, the 10 men rallied, and goals from Pat Gilhooly and David Russell, both in the final 5 minutes, secured a replay at Ibrox on the 13th of November 1897. With Willie Orr out through injury for both replays, Rangers took the lead from the penalty spot in 20 minutes in controversial fashion. The Evening News of the 15th of November wrote, "What the penalty kick, off which the Rangers scored, was awarded for, nobody could say. And as the ball at the time of the occurrence was well out from goal, the absurdity of the present form of the rule was once more exemplified." If Rangers were lucky with the penalty, they were out of luck in the second half, when Smith fired a shot which by all accounts literally burst the net. But this apparently confused the referee, who awarded Celtic a goal kick. Celtic's best performers were the goalkeeper Dan MacArthur and forward Pat Gilhooly, the Edinburgh Evening News continuing, "If MacArthur saved the colours in one respect, Gilhooly did in another. The finest defence cannot hold out forever, and Gilhooly gave it more relief than all the other forwards put together. He is fast and clever, and gives every promise of being of the greatest use to the club, so long as Campbell and he are not transposed." It was from a run and cross by Gilhooly that Henderson headed in Celtic's equaliser to force a second replay. Following this second draw, rather than play off on a neutral venue, the toss of a coin determined that the second replay would be played at Ibrox again on the 20th of November 1897. Celtic again had to come from behind, Gilhooly the provider for George Allen to head an equaliser, which took the game into extra time. Johnny Campbell missed a great chance in the first period of extra time, shooting over the bar from right in front of goal, and it was Rangers who finally pulled away with 2 goals in the last few minutes, sealing a 3-1 win. The 3 matches were notably marred by rough play, and by now the rivalry between Celtic and Rangers had taken on a less friendly tone, with a sectarian edge beginning to creep in. David Russell was the target of particular vitriol from the Rangers supporters in the second and third games for his part in an injury to one of the Rangers players, although the Edinburgh Evening News described him as a mere agent of the accident. Relations were becoming strained off the field too, with both clubs continually adding ground extension and improvements in a bid to stage the biennial Scotland-England International in Glasgow. Ibrox had staged the match in 1892, but in 1894 and 1896 it was held at Celtic Park. In November 1897, the SFA again chose Celtic Park over Ibrox for the match of 1898, but the lengths to which each side would go to outdo the other in pursuit of the prestigious England International match would result in tragedy when Ibrox was finally chosen as the venue again in 1902. Despite the disappointment of the Glasgow Cup exit, Celtic marched relentlessly on in the league, winning their next 5 matches, including a 5-1 victory over St Bernard's and a 9-1 win away to Clyde on Christmas Day 1897. The match at Barrowfield was a triumph for the much-maligned George Allen, who scored 5 goals on the day. The Scotland international forward was the club's top scorer with 16 goals in 19 matches in his only season at Celtic Park, but he never seemed quite comfortable in the system Celtic played, having a more urgent style in contrast to the slightly more studied passing game of the rest of the forwards. He returned to Liverpool at the end of the season. Tragically, he contracted tuberculosis shortly afterwards and died at the age of just 24 in 1899. By close of play on Christmas Day 1897, the champions' Hearts had been deposed, having played all 18 games and sitting 6 points behind Celtic on 20 points. Celtic were 3 points ahead of second-placed Rangers, who had played 1 game fewer, and the match between the two at Celtic Park on New Year's Day looked like being the decisive match of the season. Yet another league record crowd crammed into Celtic Park on the 1st of January 1898, estimated at around 50,000, and they saw Pat Gilhooly put Celtic ahead after just 5 minutes before Hamilton equalised for Rangers. By half-time, there had already been crowd encroachments onto the pitch, which continued into the second half. At first, fans had begun to sit on the cycle track in search of a better view, and soon they were sitting on the running track, eventually coming over the touchline. By the second half, the situation was becoming farcical. The Edinburgh Evening News of the 3rd of January wrote, "The mischief began early, and the cycle track was invaded long before the commencement of the play. As their interest in the game deepened, the spectators encroached further. Soon the pedestrian track was gained, and eventually a throng of some half a dozen deep obscured the touchline. The police were absolutely powerless, and might as well have been controlling the traffic in the Gallowgate. Play was interrupted on about 10 occasions. The Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 3rd of January 1898 wrote of the second half, "Scarcely had the hostilities been recommenced than the crowd again showed itself on the field and interfered to some extent with the work of the players. The whole circumstances became intolerable. The crowd were in a holiday, humorous mood, not much amenable to force and still less to reason. After a long interval the game was resumed. A huge mass surrounding Dickie's goal completely prevented him from fielding the ball as it was crossing his uprights. 10 minutes from time, a crisis was reached and the players were withdrawn from the field, and thus ended what promised to be a serious affair in little else than a farce. The scene which prevailed at the end beats description. It was one never to be forgotten. Persons were jostling one another, and the players had great difficulty in getting to their respective dressing rooms. The primary mistake made was in playing a league game on New Year's Day. The officials, when arranging the fixture card, ought to have been aware that on such a day footballing enthusiasts are apt to indulge in that which raises them to fever heat and causes them to lose their heads." The abandonment suited Celtic. They won their next 3 league matches against Dundee, Partick Thistle and St Mirren, and had already secured the championship by the time the two teams finally met again in the rearranged fixture on the 11th of April to play out a scoreless draw in the final league match of the season. Willie Orr made his return from injury to play in the match against Dundee on the 15th of January, meaning he missed Celtic's revenge mission at Arthurlie the week before when the Barrhead team were thrashed 7-0 in the first round of the Scottish Cup, a year and a day after the humiliating 4-2 defeat of the previous season at the same ground. But their Scottish Cup hopes were dashed once again in the next round, a 3-2 defeat away to Third Lanark on the 22nd of January 1898. The Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 24th of January captured the general mood. If there were no surprise results when the first round of the Scottish Cup ties was decided, the same cannot be said of the second. Who for a minute supposed that the Celtic would have to say goodbye in favour of the third LRV, or that the Queen's Park would defeat St Bernard's by 5 goals? Yet such was the case, and for another year the blue riband of Scottish football has been put beyond the reach of the bold Celt. The jubilation at Cathkin was great, while Parkhead was robed in mourning all Saturday evening. Out Ibrox way too, joy was mingled with sorrow. It had been hoped that in the third or semi-final rounds, Celtic would have been drawn to visit Ibrox and thus create another Klondike. But the Volunteers have cut up the goldfields and the prospects of yielding a large dividend have been upset. For a considerable time back, Knapp had been gone on the Celtic for their chances of entering the final, and the Directorate had the fond hope of seeing the Scottish Cup at Parkhead as a result of their efforts. Since the Association Cup started in 1873-74, only once, in 1891-92, have the Celtic carried it off. It must indeed be heartrending to the officials at Parkhead to see cup after cup, which they expected to have the privilege of filling, pass from their grasp. Certainly their honours are to be few this season, and should the Rangers succeed in defeating them the next time they meet under league auspices, the championship flag will be gone beyond recall. If the battle has been fierce in the past, it will be more so now. No stone will be left unturned. Their defeat by the third LRV will be a serious loss to the club. Despite the Dundee Evening Post's words of warning, Celtic wrapped up the league title fairly convincingly, remaining undefeated in the competition and finishing 4 points ahead of Rangers in second place. The title was clinched on the 12th of February 1898 with a 3-0 win over St Mirren at Celtic Park, with 2 goals from Pat Gilhooly and 1 from David Russell. That same afternoon, Rangers lost 2-1 at Dundee, leaving Celtic 4 points ahead, with the rearranged game between the teams from the abandonment on New Year's Day the only match remaining. The Edinburgh Evening News wrote on the 14th of February 1898, "It was not expected that the league championship would be decided on Saturday, but to Dundee be the credit, or otherwise, of ending the suspense. Since the first year of the league, when the Rangers tied with Dumbarton for the championship, the Rangers have never performed with the same consistency in the league as in cup competition, and once again they have let the honours slip through their fingers. Lucky the Celtic may have been on several occasions, but at all events they have made no blunder, and as it has turned out, that brilliant display of theirs at Ibrox in September has given them the supremacy. With a single match to go, their register is a brilliant one, and if they escape defeat from the Rangers, they will come up to some folks' scrupulous ideas of what champions ought to be, an unbeaten team. After the experiences of last year, we in Edinburgh cannot afford to fall foul of their performance in bearing off the championship for the 4th time, and 4 times champions out of 8 years is indeed something to boast of." I've said this several times over the course of these podcasts, but the reports in the Dundee Evening Telegraph and the Edinburgh Evening News bear out again that the Scottish Cup was a far more prestigious competition in this era than the Scottish League. Today we regard the league champions as being without a doubt the best team in the country, the team who have proven themselves the most consistent of all over the course of the season. There's a large element of luck involved in the cup competitions. One misplaced pass, one goalkeeping blunder, one poor refereeing decision, and your cup dream is over. Or if you're on the other side, your cup dream has come true. But the league requires and rewards consistency and resilience as well as ability. Nevertheless, in these closing years of the 19th century, there is a feeling of the league being a consolation prize if the Scottish Cup is lost. By the end of the season, the perception would once again be of Rangers as the leading club in Scotland for their 2-0 win over Division 2 champions Kilmarnock in the Scottish Cup final. Looking back over the Scottish League era to this point, anyone would be forgiven for considering Celtic and Hearts the two leading clubs in Scotland. Celtic had won 4 league titles to that point, Hearts were the next best on 2 titles, then Dumbarton with 1 outright and 1 shared with Rangers. But in the summer of 1898, it was the Ibrox club who had their tails up, having now won the Scottish Cup 3 times since Celtic's only triumph in 1892. It was success in the cup competitions rather than the league that was drawing ever-increasing crowds to Ibrox, while in the league Celtic had been far more consistent. The next few seasons would see that turned on its head. Celtic suffered a blow in early May of 1898 when centre-half David Russell joined Preston North End. A mainstay of the title-winning side, his signing by Preston caught the board napping. The Lancashire Evening Post wrote on the 3rd of May 1898. The capture of David Russell was a smart performance, for he was snapped from beneath the very nose of the Celtic officials. Russell, having already played for North End, can come down without a transfer fee, and his return to England is the most severe blow the Celtic have sustained for many a day. He is, without doubt, the most expert centre-half-back in Scotland. Another departure that summer was centre-forward George Allen, whose registration, it was reported, had been retained by Liverpool. He similarly was allowed to return to his former club with no transfer fee. Allen was replaced by James Fisher from Aston Villa, a very pacey forward who unfortunately failed to settle at the club. Moving north from Everton to Celtic was left-back David Storier in a record transfer fee paid by a Scottish club of £320. He would play for Celtic for 3 seasons and captain both club and country in that time. His capture was noted at the time as a sign that the great Dan Doyle was nearing the end of his career, and he came north along with the highly rated international forward Jack Bell. The Sporting Life commented on Scottish clubs' newfound ability to reverse the flow of professional talent from north to south on the 22nd of August 1898. The old regime of things has changed, and in the strong competition for the leading talent in the football arena, wealthy Scottish clubs can now hold their own, and in fact more than their own, with their English rivals. In years gone by, Scottish clubs used to bitterly lament the inroads of the English professional agent, but the long line has turned, and some English club leaders are being paid back in their own coin. Last season, the Celtic created quite a furore when it became known that they had managed to induce Campbell, Welford and Reynolds of Aston Villa to join them. And when it was noised abroad later that Hillman, the burly Everton custodian and one of the finest goalkeepers in England, had been secured by Dundee, it became fully apparent that Scotch clubs had fairly risen to the occasion and were determined to hold their own if money had any say in the business. All these men, with the exception of Reynolds, seem pleased with their quarters, for they have re-signed for another season at least. This season, it has again been left to Celtic to furnish something stirring in the way of captures. Doyle, their old back, was getting into the sear and yellow, and without much ado, the big Glasgow combination bagged Storia, the Everton back. Finding the Goodison Park reserves to their liking, the Scotch officials wiled away Jack Bell, the international forward, to his native country, the transfer fee in this case being at least £300. Any club in the kingdom would have been glad to secure Bell, and keeping this in view, the enterprise displayed by the Celtic officials is all the more commendable. Season 1898-99 would, on the face of it, seem to have been something of a disappointment. The capture of Bell in particular caught the imagination of the supporters, but he did not settle in immediately, and in the second league match of the season he was shifted around the forward line to little effect as Celtic struggled to break down the Clyde defence in what was the first ever match played at their new Shawfield ground. His arrival would seem to have unsettled the forward line somewhat, the Scottish referee of the 24th of August 1898 recording Celtic's search for the right combination up front. "What think you of a player in one match playing outside left, inside right, centre forward and centre half-back. Jack Bell, whom the Celts all love, did so on Saturday. It would be nonsense to say he filled all these parts with equal credit, but it is truth to say that neither of them is his true part. We have advised Celtic to play Bell on the outside right, and we still tender them this counsel. Their forward play against Clyde was of the higgledy-piggledy order and had little method or combination in it. There was far too much close passing and too much of what a Celt would call fiddle-faddling. Wider, faster play is wanted, and they must give us on occasion such strong individual runs as Bell has favoured us with at the Crystal Palace, at Ibrox, and even at the Parkhead International. The fear that placing Pals, McMahon and Campbell together on the left wing would result in too much close play between them is, we understand, what parts them at present. But there can be no question that as a wing they are an almost perfect combination. Despite the summer spending spree, Celtic struggled in the opening months of the season. The forward line flattered to deceive, on occasion playing in quite breathtaking style, but to little effect. The Scottish referee wrote on the 12th of September 1898, after the following week's 2-1 defeat at Easter Road, "Their forwards played a very pretty passing game, but they overdid it. There was a great disinclination to shoot, and too much finessing and manoeuvring for position, with the result that the Hibs' sturdy and active defenders effectively spoiled them." Home and away losses to Hibernian and 4-0 defeats at home against Rangers and away to St Mirren left the league campaign in tatters by the beginning of October. Willie Orr had been out of the team and was only restored to the lineup for the second Hibs defeat. After the defeat against St Mirren, the board decided reinforcements were required, and Barney Battles was brought back into the fold on the 3rd of October 1898, making his second debut in a 1-0 win over St Bernard's on the 8th of October. The Scottish referee celebrated his return on the 10th of October. "Back to the Celtic again, let us join the happy refrain. Out with your rattles, for big Barney Battles is back to the Celtic again." The return of Battles saw Celtic give Rangers a far harder game of it in October's Glasgow Cup semi-final at Ibrox. After having been swept aside by Rangers in the league match at Celtic Park, the 1-1 draw at Ibrox on the 15th of October was something of a morale booster, with a fighting performance capped by a tremendous shot by David Storrier to level the match, described by the Dundee Courier of the 17th of October. "It was a grand shot sent in from at least 30 yards out, and was the best secured at Ibrox for many a day." The replay at Celtic Park on the 22nd of October saw a second Celtic debut for John Divers, re-signed from Everton 2 days after the Ibrox match. Celtic were now a different proposition than they had been in September, but despite having the best of the play, they went down to a 2-1 defeat, Divers being at the centre of the drama as Celtic missed a golden chance to draw level. The Scottish referee of the 24th of October 1898 wrote, "Crawford had seldom shown his true standard, but it was never expected of him to cause a penalty for tripping, a repeat of an offence a moment earlier outside the dreaded confine." Excitement ran high as Alex King came out to take the kick. In a body, the teams rushed forward with the kicker, while the ball struck the bar and, bounding down, Dickie secured it. King may not have been interfered with in his kick, but the rules had been infringed and the kick had to be retaken. Mr. Bailey's decision was impartial, just, and without fear or prejudice. This time Divers took a trial and was let alone. He sent the ball with great force against the post, Dickie clearing the rebound and being interfered with in the attempt. Yet another cup exit to Rangers left a cloud of gloom still hanging over the club, but form picked up considerably after the Glasgow Cup loss. A 3-2 victory over St Bernard's was followed by a remarkable 9-2 win over Clyde at Celtic Park on the 5th of November 1898. The teams were drawing 2-2 at half-time when Johnny Campbell had to go off injured, but 10-man Celtic scored 7 second-half goals to win 9-2. The Clyde players walked off the pitch in the 87th minute after Celtic scored their 9th, claiming it was offside. The Celtic players and the referee remained on the pitch until the referee blew the final whistle 3 minutes later. Clyde protested to the league, calling for the match to be replayed on the grounds of encroaching darkness at the end and the incompetence of the referee. But a meeting on the 1st of December 1898 severely censured Clyde for allowing their players to leave the field, and their appeal was dismissed. Reporting on the appeal on the 2nd of December 1898, the Edinburgh Evening News also reported that Celtic had finalised plans to further extend Celtic Park's capacity to 100,000. The Clyde match had been followed by 4-1 and 4-0 wins over Dundee away and Partick Thistle at home, and the following week the return fixture against Partick Thistle at Meadowside was played. Willie Orr scored the first goal in an 8-3 win on the 3rd of December 1898. Celtic had now scored 28 goals in their last 5 matches and were finally showing the kind of form expected of them, but it was too late to save the league campaign, with Rangers, who had won every match so far, 8 points ahead, and Celtic a distant 5th. Following the Glasgow Cup defeat, Celtic's only other loss that season was to Rangers again on the 2nd of January 1899, a 4-1 loss at Ibrox. A 4-1 win at Celtic Park against Dundee on the 7th of January 1899 wrapped up the league season for Celtic, who finished 2 points behind Hearts in 3rd place, but 12 points behind the new champions Rangers, who won their first outright title with a 100% record in their 18 matches. The Scottish Cup campaign then got underway with an 8-1 win away to 6th Galloway Rifle Volunteers in Dalbeattie on the 14th of January. This was followed by a 3-0 home win over St Bernard's on the 4th of February and a 2-1 home win against Queen's Park on the 25th of February. A 4-2 win over Port Glasgow Athletic in the semi-final set up a showdown with Rangers at Hampden on the 22nd of April 1899. Celtic warmed up for the final with a 2-0 win over Liverpool, John Divers and Sandy McMahon the scorers, while Rangers headed for the coast for their preparation. Rangers had high hopes of emulating Preston North End and Aston Villa in England by winning the first Scottish League and Cup double. Perhaps surprisingly, given their league placings, a close game was expected between what were now regarded as Scotland's 2 leading clubs. Celtic had won 4 of the 9 Scottish League titles contested, while Rangers were pursuing not only the double, but a 3rd Scottish Cup in succession, a feat previously attained by Queen's Park and Vale of Leven. The Hamilton Herald and Lanarkshire Weekly News wrote on the eve of the final, "Tomorrow the Celts and Rangers will fight for possession of the blue ribbon of Scottish football. Who will win? Well, the question is a difficult one to answer. Rangers are hardly as good as they were earlier in the season, and Celtic are somewhat better than they were. Rangers have had more taken out of them by their opponents. If the Celtic halfbacks are in form, the cup should go to their club. Celtic, at any rate, may be trusted to make a supreme effort to win. They have not held the cup since 1892, when they beat Queen's Park, who turned the tables on them the next season. Then in 1894 the final was, as this year, between Rangers and Celtic, when the former won, following up this success in 1897 and 1898 with successive wins. Not since the early years of the competition has a club won the cup 3 years running. Queen's Park led off, Vale of Leven followed, Queen's Park came in again. Now Rangers will try to emulate the performance of the giants of old, and Celtic will do their utmost to prevent the duet becoming a trio. Hampden Park will be taxed to its utmost to hold the crowd, which is sure to reach a big figure." The Scottish referee of the 21st of April 1899 broadly agreed with this assessment, and also hinted at the emergence of Celtic and Rangers as the superpowers of Scottish football, using their financial weight to draw the best players from all over the country, and possibly to the detriment of the Scottish game as a whole. "Since 1895 till now, the provinces have supplied one of the finalists, and it is well for the health and prosperity of Scottish football that this should be so. Renton, Hibernians, Dumbarton and Kilmarnock must now, however, give place to the city giants, and thus the interests in this final tomorrow is largely, if not altogether, confined to within the city walls. This we consider bad for Scottish football. Far better would it be were the interest in this crowning event of the football year spread over a wider area, and appealing therefore to a more general spectatorate. We are not likely to have such national finals so long as we have the city monopolists buying up and retaining the country talent in their services. Some little discount must be made to this, for critically and closely considered as teams, the Celtic and Rangers are not made up of city players, but of players drawn from all parts of Scotland. In this way, they may be regarded as national teams in the pay of city clubs, and therefore fitting finalists to a national competition. Leaving these inner aspects of this final, let us hope that tomorrow's match will be worthy of the occasion, and that the public will be rewarded with play in keeping with the reputation of the clubs and of the historic traditional value of the cup for which they compete finally and to the death. Unlike a lot of early Scottish Cup finals, which had been played in February or March, the weather on the 22nd of April 1899 was perfect for football. A warm, windless spring day on which a huge crowd might have been expected. The attendance was estimated at just 25 to 30,000, restricted by the capacity of the second Hampden Park, which is better known today as Cathkin Park, after Queen's Park moved on to the present Hampden site in 1903, with Third Lanark taking up the lease. The Scottish referee of the 17th of April considered whether the ground was large enough for the final, with the admission price being doubled to keep the attendance down. Will Hampden hold? This question has been asked since the Celts put the port out of the ties, notwithstanding the fact that St Mirren barred the way to the Rangers. Alternative to Ibrox, Hampden Park was chosen by the SFA as the venue, and therefore the final must be played there. The clubs interested have no option in the matter, as the rules say neutral ground, and neutral ground it must be. From a public point of view, it may be a matter of regret that this should be so, as the folks who are likely to patronise the event on this occasion are likely to get a squeeze for their shilling along with the pleasure they expect to derive from the play. Yet it may not be so bad as anticipated, as the shilling tariff has always had a check on attendances on big occasions, there being people who, on principle, will not pay more than the usual sixpence, a sum quite sufficient to pay for any football match. Circumstances alter cases, and certainly to secure the least chance of affording the public a little comfort, the extra for Hampden is necessary. Willie Orr played in every round up to the final, but missed out on the day through injury as Celtic lined up MacArthur, Welford, Storier, Battles, Marshall, King, Hodge, Campbell, Divers, McMahon, Bell. The Scottish referee of the 24th of April 1899 gave the heights and weights of each player, and it gives an insight into how the game in Scotland has changed since the closing days of the 19th century. Dickie was the taller of the two goalkeepers at 5'8.5" to MacArthur's 5'6". With the exception of Rangers centre-forward Hamilton at a lofty 6 foot, the tallest player on the field were Celtic's left wing pair, Sandy McMahon and Jack Bell, both 5'11". Next were the four fullbacks, who ranged from 5'9.5" to 5'10.5". At centre-half, Celtic's Harry Marshall was 5'6.5", 2 inches taller than Rangers' Neil at just 5'4", a centre-half barely as tall as Jimmy Johnston. The rest of the players, half-backs and forwards, ranged from Rangers' Campbell at 5'5" to Big Barney Battles at 5'10.5". Both MacArthur and Dickie would have been dismissed as far too small to be goalkeepers in the modern game, and neither of the centre-halves would have been considered for the role once the WM formation was introduced in the 1920s, when the centre-half was moved back to the defensive line. Average height has increased since then, so of course 19th century players were smaller on average than players today. But while clubs today tend to favour height and weight through the centre of the team, from goalkeeper to centre-forward, the tallest players then seemed to be the fullbacks, while goalkeepers and centre-halves were not noted for their height. It suggests that Route 1 type football was not widespread in the Scottish game, with football reporters usually placing a high value on clever combination play between the forwards. Scottish professionals in England were particularly coveted for their passing ability. We'll never know what the 19th century football fan would have made of our modern game, but it's possible that they enjoyed watching teams playing a far more intricate, inventive game, at least in the final third, than we typically see in the SPFL today. It might seem surprising, given Rangers' all-conquering form in the league and their 3 victories over Celtic in the League and Glasgow Cup. But in line with predictions in many of the papers, Celtic dominated the final, with their halfbacks Battles, Marshall and King on top form and controlling the middle of the pitch. Behind them, Welford and Storrier mopped up anything that came through, and apart from one early save, MacArthur had little to do. As the first half wore on, Celtic applied increasing pressure, although the old early season fault of over-elaboration saw chances squandered. The Dundee Courier wrote on the 24th of April 1899, "A foul kick, well placed by Welford, let the Celtic in, but the forwards fizzled the chance which was presented to them. Returning to the attack once more, Bell sent in a high shot, which, after bobbing about the goalmouth, was put into the net by Gibson in making an attempt to kick it over his head. The point was disallowed, however, Nick Smith having been previously fouled. The Celtic at this stage were certainly attacking more frequently than their vis-a-vis, and several pretty chances were thrown away by them. Fouls were frequent on both sides, the Rangers perhaps being the worst offenders in respect of the questionable tactics employed." Celtic opened the second half the way they ended the first, with Dickie in the Rangers goal making 2 great saves before Barney Battles blasted a chance over the bar. Then disaster, with Jack Bell injured by a crude challenge from the Rangers fullback Nick Smith, which left him practically useless for the rest of the match. Bell is said to have wanted to come off, but a grim-faced Willie Maley ordered him to remain on the pitch despite his heavily bandaged knee. Soon after, Rangers thought they had taken the lead, with Campbell firing home, but it was ruled out for offside. Celtic took the lead on the hour mark when Sandy McMahon headed in a Johnny Hodge corner kick to send the Celts and the crowd into raptures. The Scottish referee of the 24th of April 1899 reported, "It was McMahon's useful napper that put the complexion the other way, however, for he cleverly caught the ball from Hodge's corner, and there you are, Dickie was beaten and the first goal put up for Celts." This did Celts a world of good and Rangers not a little harm. Moving none too effectively or solidly, they became too eager and too anxious, and from bad they went to worse. Hodge had been signed from Port Glasgow Athletic at the beginning of the year and made a scoring debut in the 6th round tie against 6th Galloway Rifle Volunteers in January. His combative, all-action runs on the wing made up in effort what he lacked in finesse, and he, more than anyone else, unsettled the Rangers' defence all game. The Scottish referee wrote on the 24th of April 1899, "Hodge had a lot of method in his madcap style and gave a few the needle with his bustling devil-may-care style. Divers did the same, the two being the exact opposites of cool, plodding, diplomatic, shall I say fly, movers and mates, Campbell and McMahon." It was Hodge who settled the issue with the second goal shortly before the end, with a mix-up in the Rangers' defence seized on by Divers, whose shot was stopped by Dickie, only for Hodge to slam home the rebound. After 7 frustrating years, the Scottish Cup was Celtic's again, and they had thoroughly deserved the win. Even the Rangers-leaning Scottish referee agreed, writing on the 24th of April 1899, "None but rabid and partisan Rangers will grudge the Celts this triumph. And even these people, we should think, will be hard to find, for the Celts leave no excuse for them. So plain was it made out that they were the better team from start to finish of the tie. The Celts were far more eager and determined than their rivals, and to this fact, aided by superior play, especially in defence, they owe their second Scottish Cup. Needless to say, the victory has given the club and its large following the utmost satisfaction, and joy, exceeding great joy, reigned in their camp on Saturday eve, and is still reigning there." The presentation ceremony took place that evening at a dinner at the Bath Hotel, John McLaughlin accepting the cup on Celtic's behalf. As was common in the period, it demonstrated the very cordial relationship between the clubs, with Mr McLaughlin speaking in very complimentary terms about Celtic's rivals, but also taking advantage of the occasion to make pointed remarks about the openness of Celtic to all. The Scottish referee reported on the 24th of April, "Mr McLaughlin, in acknowledging the enthusiasm displayed at the close of Mr McCulloch's speech, said that it was the 4th time the Celtic had figured in the final and the 2nd time they had won it. Nobody would say they had won it out of their turn, and no one, he knew, would grudge their victory less than the Rangers. and the first congratulations he received came from them. It seemed somewhat out of place to boast of one's own club on an occasion like this, and he felt inclined to be modest and say little about it. When the Celtic club was instituted, it gave an impetus to Scottish football that was desirable, but it was also imagined that the sectarian element would lead to very grave results. It had done nothing of the sort, but, on the contrary, the club had increased interest in the game all over Scotland, and not on account of racial principles or colour of jersey, but on account of the high standard of the play shown. He would point to the fact that the players were culled from all parts regardless of sect. It afforded him good pleasure to propose the health of the Rangers, and there was no club that could boast of a record like theirs. For the last 4 years, they had held the premier position in Scottish football, and he would dare say that there was not a club in the British Isles that could show a record superior during that period. The relations between the executives of the Celtic and Rangers continued to be of the friendliest, and he was certain would continue. Mr. Henderson, president of the Rangers, in reply, said that the general opinion of the members of his club was that the better team had won. Note that over the previous 4 years, only Celtic and Hearts had been league winners, yet McLaughlin describes Rangers as having held the premier position in Scotland. If Scottish Cup wins meant that, then Celtic were now in the ascendancy, despite Rangers having just won their first ever outright championship, winning every match in the process. It was a funny old game. Just over a month later, on the 27th of May, Celtic consolidated their position with another 2-0 win over Rangers, at Ibrox this time, in the Glasgow Charity Cup final. It was notable for Celtic fielding a weakened team, yet still winning convincingly. Goals coming from Sandy McMahon and Peter Summers, a youngster who had played a couple of league matches in 1897-98 and who would, in the new century, become a Celtic legend. Willie Orr was restored to the half-back line alongside the newly returned David Russell. The Athletic News carried a column entitled Our Scotch Letter by Jonathan Oldbuck, in which he wrote, "The Celtic Football Club are monarchs of the Scottish football field this year, and no one will grudge them their tenure of the premier position. They have paid for it, and fairly and squarely too, so what is there to grumble at? All honour to the winners. The Celtic could well claim to be champions when they won the Scottish Cup and then the Glasgow League, but on Saturday they made succour by winning the handsome Charity Cup, defeating their purely Scottish opponents, the Rangers. There were some 20,000 spectators present at Ibrox who viewed the match in sweltering hot weather. The game was a fitting last act of the season, and seldom has the curtain dropped on a finer." Celtic had spent big since incorporation, and despite finishing a distant third in the league after winning it in 1897-98, this was the year when the board and the fans considered they had received an adequate return on the investment. The final season of the 19th century followed a similar pattern to the one just gone. Rangers won the league convincingly again, winning 15 of their 18 matches, but they failed to beat Celtic in the league, a draw and a win for Celtic being the outcomes of the head-to-heads. As this suggests, it was inconsistency that again cost Celtic the title, while it was now Rangers who had the ability to grind out results over the course of the campaign. While Rangers had now won the second of what would be 4 league titles in a row, Celtic were the happier at season's end, having retained the Scottish Cup. What no one could have known at the time was that the opening of the 20th century would prove a difficult few seasons for Celtic, and the Scottish Cup win over Queen's Park in April 1900 would mark the end of their initial burst of success since their founding in 1887. Season 1899-1900 opened with a win over Clyde, followed by a 2-2 draw with Kilmarnock on the day the new rugby park was opened on the 26th of August. A couple of days later, Sandy McMahon was rewarded for almost a decade of service with a testimonial match against Rangers that raised the remarkable sum of £400 for a man described in the Scottish Referee of the 1st of September 1899 as one of the most popular players that ever donned a jersey. McMahon had briefly left Celtic after helping them beat Queen's Park in the Scottish Cup final of 1892, agreeing to join Nottingham Forest along with Neil McCallum, but a recovery team headed by Tom Maley was dispatched to the East Midlands to bring him back, although it would be no easy task, with the Preston Herald reporting on the 10th of August 1892. Whether the Forest will be able to keep them now that they have got them is another matter. The Celts will no doubt be on their track to regain them. They will not find them in Nottingham though, so we'll have to ferret them out from somewhere else. Tom Maley was a formidable operator when it came to dissuading English agents on the track of Celtic players, once running a car carrying Peter Dowds and an Everton official off the road not far from Glasgow before ordering Dowds into his own car and giving the Everton party their marching orders. When Fred Dewhurst, the Preston North End secretary, sent a telegram to Dowds asking to meet him in a Glasgow hotel, Tom Maley sent a reply saying, "Peter can't come, I will." Mr Dewhurst dropped his interest. So despite Forrest's attempts to hide McMahon away, Maley found the player with little difficulty and brought him back to Celtic before he had played a game for the East Midlands club. McCallum, though, remained in England. Both before and after his Nottingham sojourn, Sandy McMahon was the idol of the Celtic support. He scored 171 goals in 217 matches and also netted 6 goals in 6 appearances for Scotland. Known as the Prince of Dribblers, he was best known as an outside left, but could play in any forward position, and despite what was described as an ungainly style, he was one of the best footballers of his era. He was nicknamed the Duke, after the French soldier and statesman and one-time President of France, Patrice de McMahon, le Duc de Magenta. The real Duke was from a line of Irish landowners who fled to France after the Williamite Wars and had their nobility recognised by Louis XV. An apocryphal tale has it that newspapers in Glasgow sold out on his death in 1893 with newsboys shouting, "McMahon deed, what'll the Celtic do now?" Sandy McMahon would remain at the club until 1903, but his benefit match was another reminder that the successful Celtic team of the early 1890s was all but gone. He and his great friend and collaborator Johnny Campbell were the only survivors of the 1892 Scottish Cup winning side. On the same page as its report on McMahon's benefit match, the Scottish referee of the 1st of September 1899 carried a profile of Willie Orr, writing, "In its day the Celtic club has had many brilliant and capable players, and in William Orr, their left half-back, it is safe to state the officials' knowledge of the capabilities of sterling men was not wanting. Since his migration to the Celts, Orr has had class men such as Battles, Russell, Marshall, King, Goldie and Hines to hold his own with, and it redounds with great credit to him that he has been retained by Celtic for 4 seasons, and in all probability will remain at Celtic Park for several seasons yet. He is but young, having been born in Leith in 1873. Of a most unassuming nature, he relies purely on his powers as a player to come to prominence. As a junior, he first played in the Airdrie Fruitfield, but the senior club of Airdrie realised his worth and he was called into their services, and many a fine game he played for the Airdrieonians. However, the English agent got on his track in 1894 and he was prevailed upon to serve English masters. Preston North End was the club which was fortunate enough to obtain his sanction and signature, and for 4 seasons he was a North Ender. During that period, he won the Lancashire Cup badge. The English method of training and playing enabled him to graduate to a high standard of excellence. In speed, perseverance and fearless tackling he improved, and Celtic Park saw him installed as a full-fledged Celt in 1897. Since then, he has been successful in carrying off a Scottish League badge, Scottish Cup badge, Glasgow Charity Cup badge and Glasgow League badge, while last season he was one of Glasgow's chosen against Sheffield. As in the past, so in the future, we expect to see Orr hold a prominent position in the football world and fit to bear his share in the football arena amidst the best exponents of the dribbling game. One thing that assists Orr nicely is his height, his measurement being 5 foot 9.5 inches, while he has developed considerably and weighs 12 stone 2 pounds. But his generosity of spirit never allows him to use his weight against an opponent too freely, his sole method being to get the ball by fair means at all hazards. Men such as Orr lend glory to the national pastime, and so long as he and his like adorn the game, it should prosper. The opening months of season 1899-1900 saw Celtic decimated by injuries to regular starters MacArthur, Storia, Orr, Marshall, Divers and McMahon. And Orr did not make his first appearance of the season until a still weakened Celtic hosted Rangers on league duty on the 7th of October 1899. The match was originally scheduled for Ibrox, but because of reconstruction work there, it was switched to Celtic Park, while still being officially Rangers' home match. Celtic allowed them free use of the ground, and Rangers took the 2/3 of the gate money due to the home team. It caused a minor kerfuffle when the league ordered Clyde to switch their home match against Kilmarnock to Rugby Park that day in order to avoid a clash. This meant Clyde had to play 5 of their first 7 matches away from home and led to bitter accusations that the league was being run for the benefit of only a few clubs. By this time, Celtic were 1 point ahead of Rangers, having played 2 games more, and had just lost for the first time that season, going down 2-0 to Hearts at Celtic Park the week before. An end-to-end game saw Rangers score first before Celtic went into a 2-1 and 3-2 lead, Rangers scoring an equaliser moments before time. Orr's return seems to have been competent rather than impressive. The Edinburgh Evening News recording of the Celtic halfbacks on the 9th of October 1899. At halfback, Battles did not enhance his reputation much. He certainly succeeded in holding a check over Smith and Miller, but it was by tactics which could not but be condemned, as Mr. Robertson very properly did. Russell was quite ubiquitous in his movements, and a great deal of the success which the forwards attained was due, in the initiative, to his judicious play. Orr was not so prominent, but nevertheless he made a good third. That same day, Athletic News was slightly more positive about Orr's contribution. Orr made a very satisfactory reappearance and fully justified his displacing King. Another point was dropped in a 2-2 draw with St Mirren the following week before a 5-0 win over St Bernard's marked the opening of the Grant Stand on the 28th of October 1899. It was a spectacular structure built on iron stilts above the south terracing on the site of the current main stand. Its construction was financed as a private investment by director James Grant and aimed to provide the utmost comfort to paying customers, including leather upholstered tip-up seats and completely enclosed with glass to protect spectators from the elements. The construction created quite a stir, being reported all over Britain, with the Sheffield Daily Telegraph reporting on the 25th of October 1899.
Fin de Cycle football accommodation is coming to something, if one may believe all one hears. Celtic's new stand, which has been on hand since January last, and which when finished will have cost nearly £6,600, is 70 yards long, 46 feet deep, and has seating accommodation for 2,000. The seats are tip-up chairs, upholstered in green leather. In front, the stand is fitted with glass windows, which can be raised at will, and so make the structure entirely open. Access is gained by a covered entrance on the London Road side of the field, and there is a transfer gate admitting from the inside of the reserved enclosure. It is expected that the various conveniences and new entrance, which will prevent all crushing, will bring a new set of followers to the game. At each end of the stand is a handsomely fitted-up lavatory, one for each sex. Above the stand, reached by a special stair, is the press box and telegraph instrument room, both of which are fitted up in the best style. The stand is undoubtedly the finest in the kingdom and marks an epoch in up-to-date arrangements. It is to be opened on Saturday with a cake and wine spread.
The stand was hugely ambitious in its conception, but did not prove to be a success in the long run. The biggest drawback was that no consideration had been given to the windows steaming up due to condensation, obscuring the view. There were also complaints about the number of stairs that had to be climbed in order to reach the seats. James Grant was entitled to a portion of the entrance fees, but it was not a financial success, and he was glad to sell it to the club after the original stand on the north side of the ground was burned down in 1904. Following the St Bernard's win, Celtic's already floundering league hopes were dashed by another defeat to Hearts, this time by 3-2 at Tynecastle, and then the Glasgow Cup final was lost, once again to Rangers, and once again after a replay, a penalty giving Rangers a 1-0 win at a fog-bound Cathkin Park on the 18th of November 1899, with the Scottish referee reporting on the 20th of November that only one goalmouth could be seen from the press box. December saw more draws against St Bernard's, Kilmarnock and Dundee as the league season fizzled out. In the final league match, Rangers were defeated 3-2 at Celtic Park on the 1st of January 1900 to restore some honour, but Celtic still finished 7 points behind Rangers in second place, having drawn 7 and lost 2 of their 18 matches. Just as in the previous season, Celtic's hopes all came down to the Scottish Cup, although they did finish first in the inaugural and short-lived Intercity League and expanded Glasgow League, which now included Hearts and Hibernian. Bo'ness were beaten 7-1 at Celtic Park in the first round, and this was followed up by a 5-1 win away to Port Glasgow Athletic before a 4-0 win over Kilmarnock at Celtic Park set up a semi-final clash against Rangers at Ibrox on the 24th of February 1900. The Scottish referee was hedging its bets the day before the match, leaning towards a Rangers win, but careful to note that there was no telling what might happen on the day.
It is when we institute a comparison between Celts and Rangers that we arrive at some reliable estimate of their rival abilities. We should, regarded as teams, claim Rangers as a superior 11 from goal to centre forward, not only because of their individual and collective qualities, but from the fact that almost unbroken they have played together Saturday after Saturday. Celtic have, unfortunately, not been able to do so by reason of injuries to their players, and although their best available is on the field tomorrow, still it is not to be expected that in solidity or combination they will be equal to a knowing lot like Rangers. At back, half-back and forward, Rangers are all-round speedier and more elastic. They should, therefore, be oftener on the ball. Celts have the weight, however, to put them off it, and it remains to be seen how effectively they can do this. Heavy ground seems to favour Rangers, but if Celts are trained, as we believe them to be, up to the knocker, then they may stand any test Rangers may put them to. In saying these things, we are far from predicting a win for Rangers. All that we indicate is that on their consistent, solid going of the season, there is much in favour of the Light Blues. Dan MacArthur kept Celtic in the game in the first half with some outstanding saves, but Rangers scored early in the second half to take the lead. Johnny Campbell equalised from the penalty spot and the tide of the match turned, with Celtic attacking with more intensity, Jack Bell putting Celtic ahead from a Gilhooly corner kick. It looked like being the winning goal, but after the Celtic defence failed to clear despite a double MacArthur save, Rangers equalised in the last moments to force a replay at Celtic Park. Despite Celtic's battling display at Ibrox, Rangers were favourites for the replay on the 10th of March, the North British Daily Mail writing on the morning of the match, "The game will be sharp and unsparing, and the Celts confidently expect to repeat their performance of the 1st of January. We are inclined to expect another draw, or, on the improved form of Neil and Drummond, a goal win for the Rangers." The conditions were perfect for football on a mild spring afternoon, and Celtic Park was buzzing with anticipation long before kick-off, the spectators being entertained, according to the Scottish referee of the 12th of March 1900, by the cheering strains of Mr Tom Maley's band. With some fans already sitting on the running track as a huge crowd gathered, Celtic lined up MacArthur, Davidson, Battles, Russell, Marshall, Orr, Hodge, Campbell, Divers, McMahon, Bell. Straight from kick-off, Celtic belied their underdog status, rushing into attack, Johnny Hodge missing a chance in the first few moments. He redeemed himself minutes later, turning in a cross from Jack Bell. Shortly after, Sandy McMahon deceived the Rangers keeper with a curling shot, the Scottish referee reporting on the 12th of March. "This signal success served sufficiently sweet to encourage the Celts to greater deeds, and forging ahead in great style they again scored, McMahon with a shot with plenty screw in baffling Dickey." As far as the match as a contest was, it finished here. 2 goals down in less than 10 minutes was too much for even Rangers to retrieve, and blank despair was visible on every Ibroxonian's face. Celtic controlled the match from start to finish, and 2 more goals, a second for McMahon and 1 for Jack Bell, sealed a thoroughly deserved 4-0 win, which could have been even more emphatic if 2 goals hadn't been disallowed.
It was a triumph for the team and also for Willie Orr, who for the first time was stepping out of the shadow of his competitors for a half-back slot and was even being spoken of in the Scottish referee as a potential Scottish cap for the forthcoming international against England at Celtic Park. The Dundee Courier wrote on the 12th of March,
"The Celtic line of halves had quite a field day and were masters of the situation throughout. Orr, Marshall and Russell, in the order given, have never been seen to better advantage."
The Scottish referee wrote the same day,
"At half-back too, usually Rangers' superior position, Orr, Russell and Marshall, the first named especially, outshining Gibson, Neil and Robertson."
The Scottish referee summed it all up.
"Celtic, in routing the Rangers by 4-0, serve up one of the most phenomenal results of the season. Glorious as is the uncertainty that surrounds cup-tie football, the most sapient and far-seeing of football mortals never dreamt that the Scottish League champions of the year would be so utterly outclassed and so decisively thrashed as they were at Parkhead. To use a missing word, it is unaccountable." In the other semi-final, played on the same day, Queen's Park beat Hearts 2-1 to reach what has been, to date, their last appearance in the final. Still resolutely amateur, Queen's Park had finally deigned to join the Scottish League and would be parachuted straight into Division 1 in season 1900-01, with the top league being expanded to 11 teams to accommodate them. Only the bottom team was relegated that season, with no promotion from Division 2 in order to bring the top league back to 10 teams. This arrangement shows the esteem in which they were still held, but they were no longer thought of as being Scotland's top club, and Celtic were firm favourites to prevail in the final. A week before the final, the Scotland-England International was held at Celtic Park with Jack Bell and Johnny Campbell in the Scotland line-up, Bell scoring Scotland's second in a 4-1 win. The other three were scored by Queen's Park's R.S. McCall with a hat-trick. His presence in the Scotland team and his scoring record, which now stood at 13 goals in 13 appearances for Scotland, served as a warning that Queen's Park should not be underestimated. McCall wasn't the only amateur on the field that day. 3 England players, including their captain Gilbert Smith, were from the Corinthians. The Dundee Evening Telegraph of the 13th of April 1900 carried an advertisement the day before the final that read, "Hoods Bar, 5-7 Hilltown. Scottish Cup Final, Celtic v Queen's Park. Special wires every few minutes by our own representative direct from Ibrox Park. Also, all the principal Scotch and English results wired to the popular rendezvous, Hoods Bar, 5-7 Hilltown." Not quite live Sky TV coverage or regular updates texted to your mobile, but here we have a turn of the 20th century bar using the latest communications technology to entice customers on a Saturday afternoon with the promise they'll find out the scores almost as they happen some 70 miles away. The paper's match preview read, "It is highly creditable to amateurism that the Queen's Park should, after a lapse of 7 years, once more figure in this important event. This, considering the strides made by professionalism, is indeed gratifying. It proves that there are still good players who participate in the pastime purely for the love of it. A win for the Queens tomorrow would be about as popular in Scotland as the brilliant victory achieved by the Thistle at Parkhead last week. Queen's Park are Scotland's pet team, and no one, save possibly the most rabid of Celtic supporters, would grudge them the distinction of carrying off the Scottish Cup. Comparing the two teams, it must be admitted that on paper at least, the Celtic looked the more formidable. One would have had more confidence in the amateurs had their defence been stronger. It is here the Greens have the pull. Since Kenny Anderson gave up the pastime and Gillespie went to Africa on behalf of his country, the Queens have been none too well served in this department. One can readily understand the desire of the Hampden officials to secure the services of a really class man to act as custodian. Tomorrow will be the third meeting of the clubs this season, and as the Celts have won the 2 previous games, they are looked upon as being the possible winners. However, Queen's Park have a happy knack of rising to the occasion, and they may distinguish themselves once again. The victory of the Thistle at Parkhead the week before referred to Scotland's win over England.
The Edinburgh Evening News of the 13th of April 1900 was less optimistic about Queen's Park's chances and also accurately predicted that there would not be a massive crowd for the occasion.
The last event of the season, which will excite national interest, takes place at Ibrox tomorrow. It is a good idea to follow up the international by the Scottish final. It keeps interest fairly brisk after the great engagement of the year has gone. All the same, a Saturday sandwiched between Good Friday and the Glasgow spring holiday is not the happiest occasion for such a match, and it will be somewhat surprising if the attendance is of exceptional size. The form of Queen's Park does not encourage the idea of sacrificing an afternoon which might be spent on holiday, for the probability is that Celtic will win with a couple of goals to spare. Of course, the general expectation may be falsified. The QP forwards, for instance, may flash forth in their fullest brilliance and win the match as they have won many a match before. However, we greatly doubt this occurrence. With the Celtic forewarned, they should be forearmed, and they are likely to succeed where the Hearts failed, namely in keeping the Queen's forwards in check. For nobody can believe that if it rests with the Queen's back division to settle the game, they will settle it to the discomfiture of the opposition. There are good points in the QP back division, but they are not many, and the team is ill-balanced, while the Celtic 11 is at least above the average for all-round strength, and as no division outweighs another, the distribution of strength should be equal on one hand to checking and on the other to winning. A crowd of around 25 to 30,000 was present on the day, with hopes for a classic contest dashed even before kick-off by the weather. The Athletic News wrote on the 16th of April 1900, "All the bright prospects of this year's Scottish Cup final producing a game worthy of the teams engaged were summarily squashed on Saturday forenoon by a boisterous wind which sprang up without warning and precluded any possibility of the teams being allowed to play their usual game. The tornado, for that is what it amounted to, swept along from the west, and one got the fair idea of the difficulty of manoeuvring a ball against, or even in it, when walking full in the face of the blast. Hats went whirling through the air and along the dirty streets, dodging this way and that, as if gleeful at the language they were drawing from their angry owners. Once inside Ibrox Park, a little shelter was afforded, for the circular terracing is constructed with a view to break the wind and give the players as much chance as possible of doing themselves justice when old Boreas is abroad. Celtic lined up MacArthur, Storier, Battles, Russell, Marshall, Orr, Hodge, Campbell, Divers, McMahon, Bell. Captain Harry Marshall won the toss, and Celtic played with the wind in the first half. Just as in the 1893 final between the same teams when Queen's Park won the toss, this proved crucial to the outcome, although Queen's Park took a shock lead, Christie scoring from a speculative effort described in the very pro-Queen's Park Scottish referee as somewhat lucky. It had been a good start by the amateurs, despite the close marking being deployed on RS McCall. But after they took the lead, Celtic took command, and Sandy McMahon equalised, controlling the ball to the left of the penalty box and shooting across the keeper and in at the back post in one swift movement. Celtic pressed on from there, and from a Bell corner, Johnny Campbell headed goalwards. John Divers may have got a touch, and the Queen's Park goalkeeper Gourley also got a hand to it, but it ended up in the net to give Celtic the lead. Jack Bell added a third before half-time, although with Queen's Park having the wind at their backs in the second half, it was still all to play for. Shortly after half-time, Divers scored again to give Celtic a 4-1 lead, but from there, Queens took advantage of the wind to put the Celtic defence under pressure, and eventually Barney Battles, trying to cut out a cross, headed into his own net to reduce the deficit. Celtic then began to play down the clock, including by means of time-wasting, resorting at times to simply kicking the ball into touch, tactics for which the Scottish referee could barely contain their disgust, writing on the 16th of April 1900, "Celt's powers were specially seen in defence, and although we are not admirers by any means of the childish tactics resorted to by big burly boys such as Storier and Battles, still all is fair in cup-tie warfare. To see these two toddling after the ball as it went over the goal lines like 2-year-old babes and return with it as if they were carrying shot for 100-ton guns at the front was a very irritating and exasperating experience for the Queen's Park team and its supporters. Celt's backs, in resorting to these tactics, legal though they were, did not increase their reputation for sportsmanship, especially since, in comparison with Queen's, they had weight, height and experience as aids to them. They were, of course, keen to retain the cup, but we think the very tactics they resorted to somewhat hindered them in this precious ambition. We don't think, for example, that Battles would have headed through his own goal had a freer, manlier, stand-up, waste-no-time game been played. Kennedy scored a third for Queen's with a long-range shot, and moments from the end, R.S. McCall finally broke free of his markers and shaved the base of the post with a shot. But Celtic successfully saw out the match to retain the cup, winning it for the third time in 6 finals since their inception 12 years before. The match had been ruined as a spectacle by the wind, but this in no way spoiled the victory for Celtic, who had, the late scare notwithstanding, been the better side on the day. The Scottish referee concluded, "Taking the final as a match, it was singularly disappointing as a display of class football. For this the wind is, of course, largely to blame, but more than this, the frequency with which the ball was sent deliberately into touch robbed the play of all beauty for the spectator. Both teams showed the best football against the wind, possibly because in beating up to it they were kept in closer contact with the ball. Once the wind got hold of it, however, it flew faster on its wings than on either those of the Celts or Queens. Whilst all the Celts forwards, notably Bell and McMahon, were good, the losing 5 were hardly ever seen to worse advantage. Even McCall, their master, was mediocre. Of course, this excuse can be offered for him that his opponents, in view of his masterly Parkhead display, shadowed him all through, 2, 3 and 4 of them whenever he found the ball, tearing after to dispossess him of it or block his passage to MacArthur. It is no disparagement, therefore, to McCall's ability that he had not one of the 3 goals, for he had miserable support and he was watched religiously and tenaciously. The Queen's half-back line was all the worse for the change in it, and both here and at back they were second-raters to Celts. Taken all over, it was not a grand final by any means, and not a fitting finish to the competition of the season. 10 times winners of the competition, this was Queen's Park's last ever appearance in the Scottish Cup final, and only their second defeat. They would remain the record winners until well into the new century, when they were finally surpassed by Celtic in 1925. Fittingly, to date Celtic are the only club who have defeated Queen's Park in a Scottish Cup final, and the 1900 final was the last to involve an amateur club. Depending on how you calculate the end of a century, Celtic either closed the 19th or opened the 20th century, once again on top of the Scottish football pile, their status enhanced 2 days later by yet another victory over Rangers, a 2-1 win at Celtic Park in the Intercity League, which Celtic would clinch with a 5-0 win over Hearts on the 7th of May 1900. The mood of optimism around the club would prove to be misplaced though, as Celtic was about to enter a sustained spell of underachievement as the big spending days following incorporation gave way to a commitment to a youth policy which took some time to come to fruition, but which, when it came, would pay dividends in the most spectacular way. Next time, we'll consider the frustrating middle period of Willie Orr's Celtic career as Rangers continued their league winning streak, while Celtic found trophy success increasingly elusive.